A lot of resources just do not go to women, number one, and they certainly don't go to women of color, Black women specifically.
The amazing Tosin Durotoye, who is an innovation strategist, a social impact leader, and also a global speaker.
We have impacted about 3,000 women.
She's also an Atlantic Dialogue's emerging leader, leading Ladies Africa's Nigeria's 100 most inspiring women, most influential people of African descent, MyPad 100 under 40.
So I'm curious to know what growing up was like. How was your experience growing up in the US and also living in Nigeria as well, as a Black woman in the US, basically?
I didn't know I was Black until I moved to the US. I feel like I cannot be just a woman, like in peace, like a single woman without like having to justify my existence. Okay, this is really, really deep stuff. Like you can't even go for a job interview without the man interviewing you thinking that you want to like date him. What are women going through?
So what really is Bloom Africa?
Bloom Africa started off as like a passion project for me. Whenever I see problems, okay, I know there's a problem, but rather than saying there's a problem, it's like, okay, what do I do? And I thought, okay, there's enough programs for women, but who's talking to the girls? Who's reaching back and building that pipeline so that our girls are not showing up after college and they know not like about the real world, you know, financial management, like practical life skills. When it comes to the Bloom Africa, I'm going to talk your head off.
Let's hear it. Hi everyone, welcome to the Beyond Borders podcast, and I'm your host, Liza. Today we have the amazing Tosin Durotoye, who is an innovation strategist, a social impact leader, and also a global speaker. She's also the founder of Bloom Africa, and at this point, I'll just really like to allow you, Tosin, to share all about your who you are, really.
Who am I? I don't know how to wrap that up in a nice ribbon, but I will just say that you have basically described the areas which I would focus on, which is my social impact work and my work in tech, in innovation specifically. So I went to NYU Wagner School of Public Service, where I studied city planning with a focus on housing and economic development. And I did that work for a long time, but somewhere in there, I was able to find my way to the tech space. And that was really cool because at that time, I guess there weren't too many women or Black women, just kind of, it wasn't yet like the infield at the time when everyone was rushing. And so I started off by learning how to sink or swim. I didn't study anything having to do with tech, but I just loved the idea of coming up with solutions to our everyday business efficiency problems. And so did that, but I always sort of did it at the intersection of social impact.
I see.
And so one of the things that I did was, you know, when I moved to Nigeria, I was serving as a director, helping to launch the first female-focused tech accelerator program. And I think that program, which ended up being powered by Google, I think was the first time when I realized I really am passionate about giving access to women. And so that's how the idea for the Bloom Africa sort of came up for me, was even if I'm not working at this accelerator anymore, what can I continue to do on my own time to make sure that women have access to information, opportunities, training, all of those things? Because it just occurred to me after spending a lot of time learning about it that a lot of resources just do not go to women, number one, and they certainly don't go to women of color, Black women specifically. So I ended up doing that. And then I found my way into aviation, which has been really interesting. But that is my passion, is travel. And so being able to go to work at a place where all I do is talk about travel and how to use technology to improve the travel experience is sort of been like a marriage of like two worlds, but I still have a lot of passion and purpose in the Bloom Africa. And so that's really where I would put a lot of my heart, is in the Bloom Africa.
Amazing. And we are obviously going to talk more about Bloom Africa, right? So speaking about travel, right? You travel, or you've traveled a lot. If you had to pick one place, especially if money was not an issue at all, if you had to pick one place in the whole world where you could live for an entire year, where would that place be and why?
Okay, I'm going to answer it's a two-part question. Before I joined my current employer, I had already visited about 50 something countries. And so I always talk about how that's my passion versus my purpose, which is like the Bloom Africa. And so passion for me is travel. And since joining the company I work for now, we have definitely been traveling a lot. And I believe I am close to 70 now. So this year alone, I think I did like 12 countries.
Oh, wow.
12 or 11. So it's different when it's part of your job.
Yeah.
But it hasn't taken away my joy for travel, which is saying a lot.
Amazing.
So that's great.
At this point, I'll be like, are you guys hiring? Oh my
People
goodness.
ask me that all the time. I do say it's a dream job, to be honest.
I love it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think this is my first time that I would say I'm just exploring my passion. It's not a lot of my work up until this point has been very sort of focused on some type of mission-based or action-based organization, things like that. And so this sort of diversion that I've taken is just interesting to just kind of go to a job where you could just maybe even do it for free, but I'm not. I'm just saying I could.
Yeah. Amazing.
Right.
I love it. And speaking of, obviously, before we even dive deeper into career, and I mean, you spoke a bit about your background in terms of career. You grew up in the US.
Yes.
And also, you're Nigerian.
Yes, I grew up in Nigeria as well.
So I'm curious to know what growing up was like and how was your experience growing up in the US and also living in Nigeria as well, as obviously I'm African and also a Black in the US, Black woman in the US, basically.
So I think that's a multi sort of layered question that you've asked, which I think maybe is asking about my experience as a Black woman in Nigeria versus in the US. And I mean, I always say that I didn't know I was Black until I moved to the US. And I did that at a young age.
When did you move here?
The first time I want to say 6 years old, and we lived here till I was 8.
Okay.
And then we went back home because my dad was here for just a temporary assignment. And so then we went back, and then we came back again when I was 12, turning 13. And I'd lived here ever since then until I decided to go on an adventure in, I believe, 2015 or 16. And then I moved back to Nigeria. Took 7 suitcases and said, I'm going back home.
Whoa.
And
determination.
I did. I showed up. Nobody asked me to come back. I just wanted to come back. I thought, I think it was after 2 terms of Obama. I was living in DC. Then there was that huge swing. And, it just felt like the right time to explore beyond borders, actually.
Ooh.
So I decided to just go back home. I hadn't lived in Nigeria since I was an adult, like a child.
Right.
And so for me, going there to explore and understand the lay of the land as an adult was so critical to my development that I sort of insisted upon it. I was like, I have to take this opportunity. Even if I end up coming back, I have to have this opportunity to understand Nigeria from the lens of my adult self.
Right.
And so that's why I did that.
Yeah. And what was that like? I mean, even more specifically, what kind of culture shocks did you experience?
So like I said, I didn't realize that I was Black until I moved to the US because, well, in Nigeria, we're all Black. I call it the Black Republic in many ways because it's such a powerfully strong Black nation. Yes. And so you don't see yourself in terms of identity, in terms of your skin color. You might see it in terms of your ethnicity. You might see it in terms of your language or your religion, but you're not going to see it in terms of the color of your skin. And I think that's what's so interesting about kind of the transition to the US is having to learn that. I think it's one thing to be born into it, which I think has its own issues, but it's another journey entirely to sort of have to discover it and like learn it and then carry it. And so moving here, it was sort of like this idea of you're going to have to work 3 times as hard, like a lot of immigrants hear that to kind of make it. But then realizing in many ways that it is kind of true. And so I think my experience in Nigeria, at least even as an adult, that I just came back from there, it allowed me to be like my full self to a degree, where I was able to sort of just take that baggage of racism. And is it because I was Black? And I wonder if this is because I was Black. All those things that you don't even realize your subconscious mind is processing. Going to the store and making sure that like, if they're following me, I have to look like I'm not touching anything. I don't think I'm stealing. Like, it's just things that I would
Those are real experiences
that I would never have had back home, because I just don't operate and I don't move around with my skin color as sort of some kind of guardrail. And so, that's been my experience, is that Nigeria was where I could, where I really felt like my truest self. But then it's so interesting because I think there's this thing, which I consider like a liminal space, which is this idea that I'm neither here nor there. I'm just sort of floating somewhere in the middle, because the truth of it, if I'm being honest, is that when I moved to Nigeria as an adult, it wasn't like I fit in immediately. Like, I don't even know if I ever did. But I will say also that I want to always be clear when I talk about Nigeria. Sometimes, switch it, like, because I probably mean to say Lagos, because I understand that there are many places within Nigeria that maybe don't function the way Lagos did or does. But it's a very unique experience. And I think for me, I always said I lived in New York, and they used to tell us, if you can live in New York, you can live anywhere else. And I'm like, no, if you can live in Lagos, that is the real cocoa.
Absolutely.
Like, you have to literally be in the thick of it. It's chaotic. It's exhilarating. It's a bit traumatic. I mean, it's like all these things. But I will say one thing I will never take away from Nigeria is that it sort of allowed me to discover my potential in a way that I don't think the U.S. would have allowed me, because, or maybe it's not.
In what way, though?
Well, I feel like maybe it's a good question, because I feel like part of me wonders if I just didn't feel that there was room or space in the U.S. for me to stretch out and really be like my full self and show up, unafraid and just show up as my true Black feminine self. Versus in Nigeria, where I felt like when you take away that barrier, that obstacle, that thing that is skin color, it allows you to then sort of, you don't realize how much it sort of makes you feel small or shrinks you in many ways. Even if you are taking up so much space, you still feel like it's in that back of your head. Am I good enough? Am I good enough? Because I'm Black, And so even when you don't get like certain opportunities, you're like, is it because of this? Is it because of that? And so going to Nigeria, where that was no longer a question, because it just wasn't part of the consideration, was not the color of my skin. It then became about how good I was, like, at something, how much I could deliver on what I said I would do. Like, it became more about the work itself. And I realized that if I did the work, then I would have space to spread my wings and people would give me room in Nigeria. And so I myself was surprised at how much I could do. I didn't know I had that potential, but like I said, I got there and I discovered it. And it was really part of I think the greatest development period that I've had in a while has been my time in Nigeria.
So let's talk about your time in Nigeria. What I know you did some social impact projects and also worked in the startup ecosystem as well. What was that experience like? What was the most impactful project you worked on?
So I think for me, looking at it, wow, it was such an exploration. I want to tell you that I kind of planned everything, but I didn't. It just sort of like, I always tell people that I just generally follow my curiosities.
I see.
And that's what the story of my life is just me being like, oh, that looks cool. I wonder what that is. And let me see if I can try that out. That's how I got in tech in the first place, was because I kept making suggestions at work.
That's the spirit of an entrepreneur.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's so weird because I refuse to use the word entrepreneur to describe myself.
Okay.
Maybe social entrepreneur I can kind of start warming up to. But in general, I've always thought, no, I am definitely a 9-to-5er.
Really?
That's what's so crazy about it. And so I feel like for me, Generally speaking, I would say that I started off in the tech ecosystem because when I moved to Nigeria, I was working in tech. So I took a job from the US and I moved to Nigeria with it. But the challenge I was having was that I was having to travel to the US like probably every other month. So I really didn't even have a chance to kind of, it's like I moved to Nigeria, but to not be in Nigeria. Like I was in Nigeria, but traveling so much that I couldn't really see what was happening or how I could play a role. And then there was a period of time where I decided to resign basically from that job. And in doing that, I sort of told myself, I don't know what's next. This is the first time since I was 16 that I haven't had like a job.
Oh, wow.
But I just felt like if I didn't let that job go, I would always sort of not immerse myself in Nigeria. I would always sort of be this expat thing going on, you know?
Yeah.
And I wanted to fully immerse myself in it. And so I ended up just thinking during the period that I had off in between work, I kept thinking, what would I do next? And I think it's a real privilege and luxury to have that opportunity where you can pause work and actually consider your next step or your pivot. A lot of people just have to roll over from job to job because you have responsibilities and you have bills and you know, it's just adulting. But then for once, I just had this time when I could just say, what would I do if I could do anything? And it just, for some reason, during that period of me moving back to Nigeria, I will say this, even though color was no longer my issue, I started to be more sort of cognizant of my gender instead.
In Nigeria.
Yeah, I'm cognizant of both in the US, which makes it like more. But in Nigeria, it's like, okay, we take away this, but this gender thing now sort of becomes more clear in terms of, okay, so it might not be my color, but it might be my gender. The fact that I can't go to a bar by myself, for example. I think I tried that once.
Oh, okay.
And my friend was like, don't do that again. And I was like, why? He's like, so see, you know, now they're going to think something. I said, I can't go to the bar. So can't go to the bar. I went to a hotel to see my friend once. The guy at the elevator, the security guy told me to go and sign in. And I remember signing in and thinking that's odd because why would I sign in when I know where I'm going to? So then another friend joined us and it was a guy. And I remember asking him, did you sign in? Because I'm trying to understand. He says sign in, like how? How would I sign in? And then the dots connected for me. I was like, so the woman has to sign in because they're assuming. So I went back downstairs to confront the security guard. And he just said, Madam, please don't vex, look around. And I was thinking, what does he mean look around? But he was like telling me to look at the lobby area, that there were so many women. And I thought they were like career women. I thought they were like, because they don't dress like we think anymore. They dress like you and I. Yeah. But they just sit, you know, like you can tell, and they're waiting for customers. And so
interesting.
I was like, oh, so you thought I was... So those experiences together, there was actually a time when I went back to the US for work. So I was still working at this company I talked about. And so I went back to the US for work. And 1 month passed. A couple of weeks passed, my dad called me. You called me back. Like, you've been gone. You just said you were going for a meeting. And I told him, I said, I don't know if I want to come back. And he said, why? I said, because like, I feel like I cannot be just a woman, like in peace, like a single woman without like having to justify my existence or having to like, oh, you know, the gate man will address you in one way because you're not married, and then he will address somebody else.
I've heard all sorts of
kinds
stories.
Of things. Like,
did you ever face like the whole apartment issue?
Oh, I did. I was going to talk about that one next because my realtor was like, you know, do you have a ring you can wear? And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. And she was like, well, we might just not want them to know that you are unmarried. And I thought, but I have the money. So I don't understand, you know, I have the money, I have the receipts, I have whatever pay stub you need. I can afford this apartment like a few times. And she was just like, oh, you know, it doesn't really matter. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I went and found me a ring. Because they were like, man, we don't know all this
when in Rome, I guess.
But what we're here to tell you is you gotta put on that ring if you want this apartment, all this. I have the money. So I said, okay, fine. So I wore the ring. And it was so crazy because I got there and I had to sign the lease, which they finally gave me. And I remember that I put my real name, like, you know, Tosin Durotoye. And the man says, so which one of these men is your husband? Because I put like my dad. it's my guarantor. I forgot that, like, my last name was the same as they. It wasn't making sense. So he was like, which one is your husband? And I was like, ha.
Oh my goodness.
Would I now say my father is my husband? Would I now say that my cousin is which one is my husband? So I just said, no, that's still my maiden name, my married name. It's okay, then put your married name there. Why are you using your maiden name? So he scratched it out. Oh my God. And I had to think so fast. So I gave him the name of my ex-boyfriend. And for a long time, I felt that spiritually, perhaps.
Oh my goodness.
That's the reason why I was married in the spiritual world. Do you understand? That was what was going on in my mind at the time. I was like, hey, this man's last name is on my lease, literally. Because I had to come up with the name and I couldn't think fast enough.
Does he know though?
No, he don't know. But I know that spiritually he's like fighting something. He's like, I don't know why I can't get free. Like I've locked him in a bottle. So anyway, that was my story. So again, I think that's always been my thing, is that I always go to environments and I always sort of, and maybe it's because I did, city planning, looking at housing, economic and community, but I always look at like who is kind of the most oppressed, or who could use the most uplifting, or who could use the most resources. So I always look into that first. And for me, like I said, it was no longer just about, Black, it was about gender and how I started to realize like, okay, this is really, really deep stuff. Like you can't even go for a job interview without the man interviewing you thinking that you want to like date him, and I just thought, how, like, what are women going through? Like, I actually hadn't locked in yet. And so when I locked in, I was like, this thing must be like even worse than I imagined. Because even me, like, I can sort of like, shield myself from some of the things, but I can imagine like if you're just trying to get a job by any means, like what you might be set up for, in those ways. So I started to be really concerned about the plight of women in not just Nigeria, but in other societies in Africa, where being a woman was seen as like, I guess a disadvantage, even though it's crazy because we take care of the home, we start businesses, we're such an like integral part of society, yet, this is where we fall. And so the Bloom Africa became my sort of idea of how can I build a platform. And it just started off me just saying, I just want to build a community. I just want to build a place where
So this was based on your experience in Nigeria?
Yes, it was directly. It was. And I was like, I just want to, think about how can I gather us to have these real conversations? Yes. How do I gather us to like, just kind of like let it out, talk about it, re-inspire ourselves, energize ourselves. And so it just started off as these like random events that I will pull together, and it would just be for women. And at that time, I think like this whole women empowerment thing was really like the fad.
Yeah.
And so there were just like a lot of people kind of in that space. But I always just thought to myself, it doesn't matter how many people are in a space, you bring your own unique sort of offering. And for me, it was never a trend. It was always going to be something that I just became really devoted to, about like, how can I be enjoying certain privileges? And then there are other women like me who are not enjoying anything, who are even like being, possibly oppressed and persecuted because they're women. And so that's how the Bloom Africa kind of launched in 2019. And we just had a series of events. And then I started doing the retreats for women. And then it became speakers coming. And I just literally grew it brick by brick, to be honest, as they say. And I did it slowly. I called it a passion project for the longest time, probably until last year when I hired a team. Then I was like, I guess it's no longer just, as I said, I was having a hard time calling myself an entrepreneur, because I think for so long, I just saw it as passionate work, like just, hard work. Like I just want to do it on the weekends and at nights. I'm just doing it because I like it, not because I want to make it anything big. But then over time, I just realized I really enjoyed it. And so now I have given in. I have built it out. I'm like doing the thing now. I got a team. And so, but again, I'm still working on nights and weekends and early mornings, because I still have my job that I'm also very passionate about, that I go to from 9 to 5.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, especially in Nigeria. I think this is the best time to talk more about Bloom Africa. You talked about the why. So what really is Bloom Africa? What are the key programs that you lead? And
thank you. I was like always want to talk about the Bloom Africa. There's one thing you can get me to talk about, as you know, people don't know I'm introverted because when it comes to the Bloom Africa, I'm going to talk your head off. And
let's hear it.
Yeah, the Bloom Africa, like I said, started off as like a passion project for me. It just came out of the desire to be, you know, whenever I see problems, I hate to focus on the problem, and I immediately go into the solution. And I think that's probably one of the trauma responses of being a firstborn African daughter. I'm so sure that has to do with that somewhere. Like, you have to go into fix it mode. How do I fix it? How do I make it better? You know, it's like, that's just, I don't know, that's just how I respond to things around me. And so I think, you know, again, having those experiences I shared sort of made me think, okay, I know there's a problem, but rather than saying there's a problem, it's like, okay, what do I do? And so the Bloom Africa started off with just that intention of let's just build community. But all along, there was this seed that I planted, which was that I knew somehow I wanted to bring in the diaspora into the conversation, because I identify myself in so many ways that that's why I say I belong to like a liminal space of neither here nor there. But in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I feel Nigerian, but there's part of me that also feels out of like I'm not quite, fitting in. And that's the part of me that grew up in the US, so like straddling sort of those identities can be challenging. But I thought, okay, rather than seeing it again as a challenge, I can see it as an opportunity where I can see, how to bring in women from the US, what they're thinking, how they're thinking, and then bring in the women from our African countries together and sort of just bridge that gap that I realize exists, because why wasn't I able to feel comfortable, And so that was always the seed. There was always a seed of that. But over time, we had a couple of iterations. I even had some time when, I didn't do much when I moved back to the US. I was very lost as to what the Bloom Africa would become, because at that time it had become like a purely face-to-face organization where we would have in-person events, in-person retreats. And so I'd never thought of it like, what do I do with this? Like if I'm no longer on ground, as they say in Nigeria, like how do I continue the mission from here? And so I felt stuck for a while. But again, in a season of like confusion and doubt, just be still. And so I was still for a while. And then it just dawned on me that actually I was in the right place if I wanted to scale the Bloom Africa, because we needed funding, the irony of this is that I'm doing this to sort of address women and their lack of resources and things. But I'm also dealing with that too, because I'm having to knock on doors to look for partners, even though it's a small sort of play at the time, I still needed, because for example, we would have the Girl in Bloom, which became an initiative that came out of the Bloom Africa, because I thought it's not enough for us to just look at the women. And again, I was at that time when I think like women empowerment was a trend. And I thought, okay, there's enough programs for women, but who's talking to the girls? Like who's reaching back and building that pipeline so that our girls are not showing up after college and they know not like about the real world, financial management, how to set up a LinkedIn, your resume, your interview, like practical life skills, which we know Nigeria, like even schools in America barely teach that, talk less of schools in Nigeria where it's just about what's in the book and the, the theory and not actually how we implement or practice. And so that was where Girl in Bloom came from. But we would need to have these summits and these events. So I needed sponsors, but I remembered going from door to door, and it would be so hard to convince companies to kind of just give us a little bit. We had some really great partners that did step up. But when I moved to the US, back to the US, during that moment of just trying to get clarity, I realized I said, the money I'm looking for is actually here. The money I'm looking for is here. And if I'm really truly, because I think when I look at the Bloom Africa, our core mission is around education. And the reason it's around education is that we believe that education is the ladder out of economic, any type of economic position you might find yourself in. You go and you get an education, hopefully you can get a job. In developing countries especially. And so for me, it's like, it's women, it's girls, but it's about how do we educate them, either through traditional ways or through gatherings or through virtual or through, anything you can think of. How do we impart information and resources and all of this while also making sure that social impact stays at the core. And so where we are now is that Well, like I said, the money was here, and I ended up setting up our 501c3. I set up our board of trustees and advisors. The advisors are all Africa-based. They represent different countries.
Nice.
Because the Bloom Africa itself has a footprint in about 8 to 9 countries at the moment. So
Amazing.
for Girl in Bloom, our reading club for girls got like 200 applications from around the world. We accepted 100 from 7 countries. We've had events. Recently, we had a virtual event that was hosted by Lovey Ajayi Jones. So again, bringing in the diaspora and starting to make those connections. And we had about 85 women from Africa and the diaspora that joined that event. And we're going to be exploring more of that. And so the idea just becomes, so the thesis I'm working on right now is that if education is the route or the path to sort of empowerment for women and girls, how do we build this pipeline from when they come into the Bloom Africa, either through our reading program or through our summit or through our ambassador program, which is again for the girls, and you come into those programs and then we start to identify you and then you start to go through our pipeline. So for example, now our social impact fund, which was mostly funded by our board of trustees, is such that we're able to give 4-year scholarships to a number of girls starting next year, but also business grants and also personal development grants. So let's say you want to go to like a conference and you can't afford it, the Bloom Africa would pay for your way there. Again, education, getting information and resources. But the idea would be if we can get those girls to the pipeline, let's say we pay for their jam or some sort of standardized exam. And again, I'm using Nigeria as sort of the model here, but we have girls in Kenya, we have girls in Rwanda, South Africa. So we will have this fund where whatever the standardized test is in your country, we can pay for that. And then from that filter, we can see, okay, who are the ones that we see the most potential in that we can invest more in? Because I always say that like for us, where we see the most impact in the work we do is in identifying those that already have the raw talent. They just are missing the resources and the tools, because there are a lot of NGOs and organizations already on the continent that are sort of attending to those that are maybe even struggling more so than we can see, you know. So we already have a lot of people focusing on, I would say, the poorest of us, you know. But then when it comes to that sort of really fragile point where you have people that they have it, what it takes, but they don't have, you know, the resources to get there. And a lot of them fall through the gap. And I think that's a great loss to us, is if you can capture those girls, give them the school fees, give them the laptops. So we just finished a partnership where we're getting free laptops for our girls as well. So you give them laptops, then they have to come to the Bloom Africa to intern. So again, you're tracking their development. Part of getting the scholarships is that they also have to do social impact in their communities. And so even though they're receiving from us, they're also learning, because we're trying to build leaders. And so it's not just about educating them about everything, but educating them with a specific lens around how do I then use what I know and what I have received to then impact those around me. So it becomes like a multiplier effect, right? Where one girl's life that has changed, her trajectory changes, and she goes around and changes a bunch of other people. And then she becomes the woman in bloom, right? And so then the woman in bloom is the one that she comes out of school. Maybe she says, you know, Bloom Africa, I've graduated. I would also like to start a side business. We give them grants, you know, I want to do personal development training. We give them the coaching and the, you know, funding for that. So it's just a way of really, I would say, kind of the full woman. So it's not just about girls or women, it's about both. And it's about making sure that we're with them the whole way. And so one of the things I'm excited about next year is this thing we're calling Campus Bloom. And it's this idea that my team said that, okay, so you got the girls, you got the women, but somewhere in the middle, we're still losing them. And that middle is, for countries like Nigeria, it tends to be in university or college, because a lot of times they don't get some of these conferences and summits and leadership programs that you get when you are, let's say, early career woman, or when you are in school, like, you know, in primary school or high school. And so that sort of gray area of, I'm in college, I'm almost an adult, but I'm not yet out in the world. Who's going to help me?
Yeah.
The transition can be very choppy. So how do we step in there too as a means of, again, helping to build out that pipeline into sort of womanhood? And so that's what we're doing at the Bloom, and it's going well. And I think where the diaspora has stepped in and where, I wasn't clear on the vision. It was like a picture, but the details are missing. And so what I've been doing lately is just filling in the details. And one of them is the diaspora has the resources.
Absolutely.
What they do not have is the information that they need as to how to give those resources, where to give those resources, how to give those resources.
Right. And who to trust.
I was going to say that that's a huge part of it, because with the diaspora, it's like you're thinking, okay, I want to help, but if I send it to this orphanage, how do I know it's actually going to go to the kids? Or if I send it to the school, how do I know it's actually going to get into the hands of the kids? And so what we are doing is to say, if you can trust us with your giving, then what we owe you is full transparency, where your funding went, who it went to. We have names, we have faces, we have receipts, we have everything, so that you can actually know that what you are doing is making a difference. And you can trust the brand of the Bloom Africa because, well, for many reasons, I think our work speaks for itself. And so that's sort of the piece that we're kind of growing out now. And that's a piece that we call it, that's the philanthropy side of the Bloom Africa. And so we have this idea called Her 100, which is this idea that with the board of trustees, we asked them to just give $1,000. And I thought I was asking for so much. I was so nervous because I hate asking for money, but then
Tell me about it.
When it comes to the Bloom Africa, I will make myself uncomfortable, right? I told you that. I'm doing right now. And so I was like, I'm going to ask them for money. These are my network. They're my network. They're my friends. And before I could even finish, they were all like, yes. Because, and I remembered being in Nigeria, and it would take me 3 months to get the same amount because I would have to go for multiple meetings, talk to multiple people just to get that $1,000. And here I am. I asked 13 women, including myself, who all put the money down. We received additional funding from just people that just heard about it through word of mouth, because we haven't even really sort of launched it yet. And the idea now is, can we get 100 women to say yes to $1,000? Yes. And then we'll have $100,000 fund. And the idea is just to use that fund to just transform lives, make sure that we are, especially in this time, I think we're seeing more and more that Black women and Black girls need our resources, our love, our time. And that's what I'm dedicated to. It's just the Black woman and the Black child. That's it. So I'm really excited about it.
Amazing. Yeah. Tosin, you're doing such great work.
Thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
Literally, when you were talking about Bloom Africa, I could literally see this was what I needed when I had just started undergrad in Senegal.
Yeah. Oh, we were in Senegal.
Yes.
I didn't know I love Senegal. Yeah. Yes.
Senegal is amazing. So it was almost like me trying to figure out different things.
Yeah.
I have the creative side of me. I want to be a leader. I want to do all these things. Who would really guide me? So you're the answer.
That's what we're trying to be.
Questions that young women have.
Yeah.
So based on your work in Nigeria, I'm sure you're aware that there are millions of children that are out of school in Nigeria. As at 2019 or before 2019, before the pandemic, it was like 10 point something million. Only in Nigeria. And I'm like, okay, what about beyond all of Africa? What would that really look like? Then after the pandemic, obviously the pandemic slowed things down. It's now around, according to UNICEF, I believe around 18 million. So it's almost like, where do we even start from? It's not like 100,000 children who are out of school. 18 million. How do we tackle 1 million and then 2 million? So what you're doing with Bloom Africa, it's almost like, yes, we already have people in school, but how do we ensure that we're creating a system of impact, multiplier effects across boards for women in Nigeria, or beyond Nigeria, obviously, across Africa. And I really love the fact that you're leveraging on the diaspora, because people talk about brain drain, but there's brain gain.
There is. I love that. I'm going to take that. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I love that, because I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, because this is the reverse of that. It's like, how do we... it may have drained, but we can recapture it, right? Absolutely. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I think that what I have found in sort of the kind of test that I've run without actually having rolled it out yet is that a lot of people are eager to do it. There are a lot of people who are eager to join hands, to give what they can. Like I said, this laptop thing was just a dream I had. I just kept saying, God, I wish somebody would, I went to my employer. I was like, do we throw away our laptops? What do we do with our laptops when we are no longer, like, if it's like something bad, if, something that somebody can fix, what do you guys do with it? And they're like, oh, usually we just, dispose of it. And I was like, in what way? And I couldn't really get to the answer. But I remember just being like, there is a way. And I stuck with that. And eventually through my networks and relationships, I was able to find someone that said, we do this. We get laptops, we refurbish them. We get some that are really almost new. Like, we'll just give them to you as long as you give us a tax form. And I thought, oh my gosh. So the idea is to get our scholars, because, there are girls in Nigeria that are going, or just kids in general that are going to school for, let's say, computer science, but they don't even have laptops. I always think about that one a lot. So they literally, it's all theory. It's all just reading because you don't actually have the tools. And so I feel like, and I didn't even know that for a long time, because when I would do my leadership programs with the girls, part of the curriculum is that they have to submit, presentations and decks. Like I teach them all these things, and they would submit it. And I always thought, this is so fantastic. And then I think there was one particular day I was talking to one of them, and I said, can you open your laptop? And she said, I don't have a laptop. And I said, what do you mean? I mean, is it spoiled or something? She was like, no, I've never had one. I said, well, how have you been doing the assignments? She said, on my phone. Oh, wow. So I was like, you've been doing these decks on your on your phone? And that just kind of blew my mind. And this is somebody that's probably in the second year of uni already, So the laptops are a really important part of it for me, and making sure that we give those to deserving students that would take that and leverage it to realize their potential, So
Amazing. Let's talk about those case studies that you have out of Bloom Africa.
Yeah.
Tell us about maybe one or two people that obviously, I'm sure you're proud of all of them.
All of them.
Like just maybe about two people you'd like to spotlight. What has their journey been like? I know there was one, I can't remember her name now, but I believe she went to was it Northeastern?
Oh, wait a minute. I'm not sure. Oh, you mean Susan?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Like on low cut.
Yes, it's Susan. I knew that was. So she goes to UMass, Amherst, and she's great. She's one of the reasons why I actually started. At that time, it was called Power Girls Africa, and later evolved into Girl in Bloom. But she was someone that I met at an event for Business Day at the time, and I was judging the business. There was like young teenagers presenting their business ideas, and they asked us to come and judge it. And a lot of it was based on tech, so how to use tech to solve problems. And so Susan was there, and she took my number, and I remember she was 15 at the time. And I remember she just introduced herself. She was very confident, and she asked me for my number, and I gave it to her. And then not long after that, she messaged me and said, hey, you might not remember me, but my name is such and such. And I didn't know who I was talking to. I didn't know who it was, and also I don't check my WhatsApp enough. So by the time I saw it, I was like, I don't even know who this is. And then the next message I got, maybe weeks later, was like, hey, this is Susan's mom. Oh, so I was like,
this is serious.
Mommy's what's going on? So I now responded, and that's how she was like, Susan, met you at this event. Can you meet her for lunch? And that's like the key. Like when parents are involved with their kids' development, it's a game changer for real. And like when you're literally involved at a level that shows deep interest in their development, not just the things you're obligated to do, but going beyond that like extra step. And so the extra step was like her reaching out to me on behalf of her child, and then coordinating the lunch meeting so that we could meet. I mean, phenomenal. And so I met her, and I just said to her, yeah, I'd love to, get to know you and mentor you, sure. And then I said, I actually have this idea that, I have the Bloom Africa, but I want to do something for girls. And I made the mistake of saying that thing because Susan did not let me rest. Oh, wow. She texted me. She's like, hey, Miss Tosin, have you launched that program yet? Hey, Miss Tosin, have you launched that program yet? And I just thought, I have to launch this program. So I launched the program because of Susan. And that was how the first class we had, I want to say it was almost like 12 girls. And back then we'd be meeting in classrooms, like actual classrooms. And I would take them through like leadership training, and like they would do public speaking. Then they had to do a community service to graduate. So they painted like a school, but it was very in person. But like I said, COVID changed things. And so we had to become virtual. But in becoming virtual, we actually were able to reach more girls. And now the 12 girls has now become 700 girls came to our summit last year. This year, we were at 400 plus, and that's only because one of our key partners had another obligation. But my hope is that by next year, we'll be talking about 1,000 students. And so starting that from 12 girls to say we can keep teaching more and more girls. And that's what we're doing now. And so.
Awesome. That's real impact right there.
Thank you.
So have you seen as far as 5 to 10 years from now for Bloom Africa?
5 to 10 years for the Bloom Africa. I have to do that now, I think, because I have a team. I have to actually think in a strategic manner. For so long, I was really just doing it as my spirit led me. And I really did enjoy it, that sort of journey to discovery of what it's supposed to look like. And that's why I think I love the name of it, because it's like something that's blooming. You may not even know how tall it'll get, how many leaves it'll have, how many flowers. There's been moments when, we were dormant and then we kind of came back again. And so just giving myself and our team the ability to ideate, try things, see what doesn't work, and just keep iterating. So I would say for me, in the next 5 years, I think what I would like to see is that fund going strong, like getting a lot of supporters in that fund so that we can really start to make that kind of, because like you said, there are millions of kids out of school. Right. And there's lots of women that are not getting access to financial tools, financial freedom. There's a lot of things that we can tackle, but I always say, start with you. If we all sort of picked up a piece of this,
right.
Honestly, if everyone just took their part and just said, let me do this one, and you just do what you can, like I literally feel that the world would be such a better place. But but just like school projects, there's only just a few that are doing the work, and everybody else is just kind of complaining, or because I always say that like it is a lot of armchair critics. People can criticize, especially my people. I love us, but my gosh, we will give you.
Sit down.
And you'll be like, but wait, what are you doing? What have you done about the thing that you are complaining? And you will say, hey, it's the government's fault. Everything is government, nothing that we can do as people, anything we want. And I'm just like, when do we start to take, some accountability, a lot actually, I think, for the well-being of our own society. We used to be a nation, at least speaking of Nigeria, of really high values, where it was sort of this culture of Yahoo that we have now, where it's almost like glorified, to just hustle in that way was never the way. But, people would easily say, it's because of government and lack of employment. Yeah. And okay, valid enough, but does that mean other African countries where they are having similar issues, like issues of poverty, are we seeing them respond in the same way that we're responding, right? So poverty alone is not an excuse to go and do things that are not going to push us forward, right, as a society. But I do think there is a lot of work for us, those of us that are wanting to help, to do. There's so much work to do.
Okay, so Tosin, you talked about 100 Women Initiative. Can you expand more on that? And when you're looking to launch it, is it out already? What do we need to know about that?
Absolutely. So Her 100, like I said, is this sort of faith walk that if we ask 100 women for $1,000, they'll say yes. Specifically in the diaspora, because that's sort of where I believe the greatest impact can be felt is if we're able to leverage their resources. And so Her 100 is the name of the initiative, which you can find out more about on our website, www.thebloomafrica.org, thebloomafrica.org. But I would say that we're going to be launching it during Women's History Month in March. And so I would like folks that are interested to follow us on social media at the Bloom Africa, just at the Bloom Africa, and also to email us if they're interested, hello@thebloomafrica.org. But what we also plan to do is to put out an application for the process once we launch so that people can actually apply to be part of the community. Because Her 100 is going to be beyond just women giving. It's also going to be about women receiving community support. So one of the things that, we're thinking about is if you're part of Her 100, maybe you'll get the first invites to retreats that we may have. So, for example, one of the things that I really want to do is a wellness retreat, because I think more Black women need to rest. And I think we're not very good at that. And so we need practice, and I'm okay with practicing resting. And so having a retreat, so you would get to be part of that. So I'm already talking in partnership with other sort of women-led organizations here in Atlanta that are also, maybe have our Black American sisters and bringing them into the fold so that we can all connect and see that even though our history has, put us in two different parts of the world, two different, kinds of experiences, that we have more in common than not, and that there's a lot that we can do to elevate each other when we link up. So I'm hoping that once we launch that application in March, that we'll get responses of women, wanting to be a part of that community, and we'll honor them all. And I think that's the other thing, is that we don't want it to just be, quite frankly, I don't want it to be anonymous. I think that I would love to feature the 100 women on our website, because I think it's important for people to know, and I'm such a big fan of women showing up with their full selves. And so if I'm a philanthropist, you can call me a baby philanthropist, but I'm going to show up and I'm going to make sure you get your name out there, fellow Black women, as being a giver and a supporter. And then we're even thinking of also opening it up to what we call legacy scholarships. And so let's say we've already started it actually, but let's say you have a loved one or even yourself that you want to have a scholarship in their memory, right? You would give at a certain level, and then that scholarship can be named after you, your loved one, whatever it is. And you can even determine or tell us okay, it's only going to be for girls that are studying, computer science, or girls that are studying this. And so in doing that, then that means that we're able to basically manage that fund for you. So again, you don't have to worry about the logistics of applying MOUs with the universities, paying up the school fees, tracking their GPAs. My team will do that. You just put the money down, and we'll make sure you're getting all the updates. So again, it gives an avenue for giving. And what it does is that it makes it easier for you to be a part of it, because you don't have to think about all the different details that the Bloom Africa will cover for you. So that's sort of where we are on that. But yeah, look out for us in March.
I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Thank you.
So I have one last question before we ask a couple of icebreaker questions. If you could give one piece of advice to the next generation of African women leaders, or women in general, what would it be?
I think one of the things that I think about a lot is how women in general shrink themselves. So I oftentimes think about all the unrealized potential amongst women because of the way society has been set up. So a lot of women, even women in developing countries sometimes, when you look at the difference in pay scale and stuff, they determined that it wasn't so much because you're a woman, it's just because of all the responsibilities that you take on. So when you get married, you might not be able to go on as many trips, and maybe you don't want to, but then that means that you're going to fall behind in your career. And so we take a lot of hits, along the way, because we sacrifice for the other roles and hats that we have to wear. And what I would just say to women is just it's never too late to decide that you want to be a different kind of woman. So even if, let's say, you raise your kids and you do all these things, and then you decide later on, I've always wanted to be a pilot. I don't know. I've always wanted to be a painter. You can still be that thing. And then if you're not somebody that has children, or you're married, don't sit around and say, oh, I'm not married, I don't have kids, there's nothing I can do. Go and be somebody. Go and do something. Realize your full potential. Because I think women come with so many gifts. They have so much to give to the world, and sometimes we overgive. But I do think that we should be cognizant of the fact that we have a lot more than we think we have, that we can contribute to the world. So women, if you're out there, it's never too late to be who you want to be. And anything you try, even if you don't succeed, you learn something. So you should never, ever feel like you can't step out on faith and just go for it. So, awesome. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, Tosin. This has been, I'm inspired myself. Let's talk. I've always wanted to ask you a question. How are you related to FD?
So FD, I don't really know the guy. I say that all the time. I don't know why people think I know him. It's so crazy.
Are you joking?
Huh? People ask me this all. Do you know how, you guys, I can't even go to the airport. People are like, Durotoye, are you related to? I'm like, I don't know him. Oh my gosh. Can I just be my own person? Of course I know him. Of course I know him. I'm like, you know what? Can I just have my own? Everyone's like, are you related to FD? Do you know FD? But you know what? I'm obsessed with him too. I like him a lot. That's my bro. That's my big bro. And so, and I always tell TFD that I'm sure that she's just like, these Durotoyes and their hats on their sleeve, wanting to change the world.
I know, right?
Like we have this very serious. We do it. We're like super. You would think that we were sent on assignment specially. Like we have the papers. Like we're supposed to do this while we're here. So TFD is always like, you world changers, But yeah, I'm really proud of all he's done and tries to do specifically for Nigeria. Like I said, there's a lot of armchair critics, but not a lot of people that are actually doing anything. And so when I see people doing something, I'm always going to give them the flowers, the acknowledgement, all of that,
Absolutely. And I'm coming back to the travel question. If money was not an issue at all and you could live in one country for a whole year at least, where would that be?
So one of the things I always say is that it's very hard for me to pick favorite countries out of the countries I visited because travel makes you appreciate so much about everywhere. So the more you travel, the more exposed you become, I feel anyway, the more you learn to appreciate something about everywhere because you're open-minded. And so you're like, I'm not really into French food, but I really like this part of France. And so, so even though I may not say, okay, Paris is number one, there's still things I like about Paris. And so I always have a hard time kind of arranging them. But what I will say instead is that if money was not an issue, then I would have 2 houses. So first of all, it would be more than one country, but I would just give you a region. If it was a house, 2 houses, I would have one somewhere in Southeast Asia, because that's like one of my favorite, but I did a whole month or more just by myself out there. So I did Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka. I just was all over and I love that part of the world. But where I truly feel at home will always be in Africa. So I will always want to have a home somewhere. It doesn't have to be Nigeria. It could be Kenya. It could be Ivory Coast. I have so many, traveling within Africa as well while I was living in Nigeria was one of the gifts that period gave me because I think a lot of us, when we have the opportunity, we probably go to places in Europe and stuff like that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not, Europe is definitely, if you were asking me, okay, which countries at the bottom, I would say probably Europe. Because I'm very much into all the culture of Africa is so diverse, and so, and I know sometimes Nigerians, when we talk about travel, we think our passporting is true. It's not just a thought. It's true that it can be limiting. Yeah. But I also think that if you're truly devoted to travel, there are people on social media who have been showing what you can do with the Nigerian passport. So and that thing always inspires me. And I'm like, people just want, it's because they're all looking at America and this. But if you're looking at so many other amazing countries, you can get in there, they'll give you a visa, and you can go visit. So as opposed to maybe going to XYZ, maybe you just go to Ivory Coast for the holidays, or because I love Ivory Coast, Senegal. I do Senegal. I've done Senegal 4 times now. I like to go there for Christmas, New Year's, because it's always
there in a while.
It's an easier pace for me the older I get. I'm not really down for December anymore. I think I've outgrown that. So for me, it's I want the villa, I want the pool, I want the good food and just quiet beach, not all the IJGBs. And you get that in which I am one now. It's so annoying because there was a point when I wasn't one of them, and now I'm back to being one of them. It's really annoying. But yeah, so it's Senegal is just that kind of perfect place for me. So there's so many beautiful countries. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
what does living beyond borders mean to you?
I think it's sort of what you see me doing with the Bloom Africa. I mean, I think that carrying that vision, and holding it in Nigeria and then carrying it with me to the US and still holding it and then figuring out how to make sure that in all the work we do, we're not just considering Nigerian women and girls, but we're considering the African woman and the African child. We're thinking about the Black women in the diaspora. Like, to me, that's thinking globally. That's thinking outside the borders. That's thinking about, okay, if I have X number of resources, do I just want to, there are ways that I can use this in a way that makes a larger impact beyond even where I stand. And so for me, that's how I think. And I think also having lived in Nigeria and the US, and then Nigeria and the US again, and then again the US, I will always consider myself a global citizen at this point. I always identify as Nigerian first, always. But in many ways, I consider myself a global citizen as well, which is just that anywhere you put me at this point, I feel like I can adjust and I can bloom. So that's beyond borders. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. This has been great. I know we didn't talk. Yeah, by the way, one thing that Tosin and I have in common is that we went to school. We went to the same uni for our masters.
Yes.
NYU Wagner. So we are
Wagners. Yeah, we always have some really amazing, passionate people that come out of Wagner.
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
That was one of the ways that she got me to say yes to this podcast, actually, because I was like, I have to support an alumni, so that's how she got the yes. But thank you so much for the invite. And it's been great talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching today's episode with Tosin Durotoye. Now, there are 3 requests I have, just 3, okay? Firstly, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get notified whenever we drop an episode. Secondly, follow us on all our social media platforms. And last but not the least, please follow Bloom Africa on all social media platforms and stay in touch with what they're doing. Everything is going to be in the description below. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.